Boy, this is great to see the turnout here this afternoon, but let's go ahead and get started. And I will do the record button if it hasn't already gotten going. So, welcome to Comma's event of the quarter. Before we get started, I would like to read our land acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish people of this land, the land which touches the shared water of all tribes and bands within the Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot regions. Just want to make sure that you know where you are. This is the session today, Practical Perspectives on the Impact of Artificial Intelligence on Library, Archives, and Museum Careers. And this is the first of a three-part series that we are hosting, and we're calling it Careers, Cataloging, and Climate, AI and Lands. And our panel today includes Assistant Professor Benjamin Charles May Lee. Ben is Assistant Professor in the Information School, where he started the lab for computing cultural heritage. Also, newly joined the Coma Executive Council. Have Richard Lewis, who's Associate Dean of Libraries at the University of Washington, Bothell, where he oversees library services for both the Bothell and Cascadia College, and he's also a Coma Executive Council member. We've got Crystal Ravi, who is a science cataloger here at UW Libraries and is guest faculty at the Information School, teaching cataloging, catalogs, and classification. So we got T is the letter of the day for Sesame Street watchers. And then moderator Ling Eagles, who's an assistant teaching professor for Masters of Arts in Museology program in the Information School. So those are just really brief introductions. We have much longer bios for our wonderful panel today on the event website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to
Fabulous. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for being here. So this session is in person. We are recording it. I think we're working on the mic setup. So hopefully for those folks who are going to watch it later, we'll be able to hear. But yeah, if you hear some interference, just be aware of that.
Honestly, if you guys scoot your tables forward a bit, that might have been more than
For the, are we going to use the owl then as the mark?
Oh, no. Just because we're so close to the speaker.
Ah.
That's you.
Okay, fabulous. All right, there we go.
Is this? Oh, no. So too soon.
I'm gonna let Ellie keep working on this so we can get started. So, yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I'm really excited. I want to thank Brandon and Sharon and Ellie and Dylan and the Coma folks. I really want to thank Jeff Ternovsky and Julie Tanaka for helping me co-plan this panel. And I especially want to thank all of our panelists. Can we give them an early round of applause for their expertise? Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to project until we get the mic started. So what we're going to do is me and my co-programmers, we've sort of put together a set of questions. We're going to just like gently progress through those for the next hour or so. And then around 3:10, 3:15, depending on how the conversation is flowing, we're going to open it up to questions. And yeah, we're going to get started, but let's, so what we're going to do to get started, since we've already, thank you, Sharon, for introducing everyone. Since we've already heard from everyone about your illustrious careers, could we just go one by one down the table? And could you folks tell us a little bit about how, like, yeah, when you like initially started thinking about artificial intelligence, what was your initial reaction to it? And then how has your thinking evolved from that initial reaction? So yeah, whoever wants to start, or I don't know, let's start with Richard. Congrats.
Hello, thank you. I started very hesitantly. I was back in, I'm trying to figure out what the dates were, 2023, when I was one of the co-chairs for UW Libraries and AI Task Force. And coming from doing my dissertation in really media literacy, philosophy of technology, I found the more I understand and get to know especially social media, the more critical I become.
Yeah.
And AI was something that I was somewhat interested, but I just was really hesitant to jump into it. So I kind of facilitated the task force more than really engaged in it. And it wasn't until I was talking to my friend Sam Weinberg, who co-wrote Verified with Mike Caulfield, and he was talking about using Claude more as an interlocutor, and that kind of intrigued me from my philosophical background. And so then I started playing with Claude and
Should we pass it?
Yes. How long is that working better?
I don't know. Yes, it is.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you. Thank you.
And technology. All right. And so it's been just a roller coaster since then. I go from enjoying moments of enjoyment to just nausea, and just really kind of resistant. And so my background in my approach in as a philosopher is really watching myself engage with technology and monitoring what's happening to me and my agency. And so it's been a really back and forth. So if you expect.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, thank you, Lane. Thank you to Calma for organizing this, to Jeff and Julie as well. It's really wonderful to be here and see a lot of familiar faces. I guess maybe to speak a little bit about how I first came into contact with AI. And so my PhD is in computer science. I did my PhD in the Allen School just across the fountain. My PhD is in human AI interaction and this broad interfacing of questions around how people encounter search systems and sort of work with them and discover information. I think my own context here is maybe a little different than the median person who's emerging from a PhD in AI, in the sense that my work has pretty much always been grounded in libraries and archives as a central focus. And so I think much of my interest has been driven by questions around discoverability, really, and I would say like a user-centered kind of way. I say user-centered in scare quotes because I think that term itself is loaded. All just to say, I mean, certainly things have changed rather drastically. I started my PhD when transformers were the new technology, Elmo was coming out, BERT, etc. And I finished my PhD sort of bookended by ChatGPT and everything. And so it's really sort of interesting to even reflect on that 5-year period about where we were and where we had come to, and see the really inflection point that was hit along the way. I think broadly speaking, in terms of my own practical AI usage, something I actually don't really know if I talk about much. I'm teaching an AI literacy course here at UW Info 110A on AI foundations and society. But broadly speaking, I actually, use AI tools insofar as they're ingratiated in everything we do, integrated in there and visible. I don't really use any LLMs for anything personally. My research lab uses it for like coding, the Cloud Code Assistant, things like that. Broadly speaking, I think I have my own ambivalence or, real hesitations and maybe my own horror around the broader discourses around AI, especially over the past few cycles of it. So I'm happy to share a little bit more about my own personal viewpoints there and practically oriented toward this panel. But I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Hello. I sort of discovered AI as a practitioner of cataloging at the University of Washington Libraries and also more broadly. So my perspective has been sort of one of excitement at first, because I thought maybe I'll never have to calculate a map scale again, when it is not included on the map. But that was actually not, that hasn't come to fruition yet. And then I started thinking about different applications, like for entity management. Can we use AI to determine which Bentley is this Bentley?
There are too many Ben Lees.
There are too many, yeah. So from that perspective, it's been taken up by a lot of vendors, and I've seen the excitement about this technology sort of translate into over exuberance sometimes, and then we end up with a lot of bad merges, which we know are a lot harder to undo than duplicates. So things like that have been kind of tempering my expectations, and also thinking, well, maybe we just need to be patient with these technologies and we'll develop further and then they'll be more useful for common applications. And we see things like Anna coming out of Finland, and that is a really cool technology that assigns subject headings to things. And we haven't really made a technology that can replicate a person looking at something and saying what it's about. So I have concerns that are coming through about things like prejudicial works or deceptive works, because AI is not very good at picking those things up. And then, you know, the conversation surrounding, you know, where are these models training? The answer is, you know, Wikidata, Reddit, and things like that for the most part for the open tools. And so how much should we be focusing our energies on making sure that that data is good so that our models can be trained better? So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about and have seen. I've also seen really great projects like Marmot, which is a tool that sort of goes through institutional repositories looking for problematic terms, like finding racial slurs and things like that in your institutional repository and saying, hey, person, we need a person's eyeballs on this. And I think there's a lot of promise for that kind of thing. The program for cooperative cataloging has been looking at AI tools as an augmentation of a human cataloger and a human metadata technologist. And so you've got maybe an AI tool doing some validation or making some suggestions that are then validated by a person. So I think, you know, those are pretty good usages, but we also have environmental concerns and labor concerns.
Folks. Yeah, I think all of you have expressed something that's not uncommon in the land sector. And just so folks know, we use that acronym around here in libraries, archives, and museums. I'm not going to say the full thing ever again. We're going to use lands to the same thing. Yeah, this sort of like I don't know, this range of like excitement to terror, I think is pretty common across the field. So you folks have already started talking about this, but could you, and we don't need to go in order, but whoever is moved to speak first, could you talk a little bit more specifically about how AI is showing up in your sort of like day-to-day work in the field? You use it today, weekly? Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Lane. Yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, I think it's helpful, at least for myself and instructive, to think about all the ways that AI has already shown up in library operations, all sorts of contexts, right? Every time we open a library discovery system, there's an AI algorithm underpinning search algorithms, optical character recognition, handwriting recognition. These tools have been a part of digitization workflows for 30, 40 years. We have questions of how do we optimally shelf books that oftentimes in library contexts are using AI. We have questions around calendar scheduling. So I guess I just raise that just to say that I think encountering or interfacing with AI, very broad definition, is an inevitable part of working in a library, or maybe just what are you participating in society. Every time I open my phone, I'm sure there are 8 different AI use cases around the electrical grid and such as well. I don't mean to be pedantic, but actually I think it's helpful to think about these use cases that we've already accepted. And you know, I think maybe one of the things that I turn to is to recognize that I think broadly speaking, we've communally accepted the idea of OCR as something really valuable for collections. And the question isn't, you know, necessarily do we refuse it, but rather how do we think about approaches for lower resource languages? How do we think about questions of equity there? So, I mean, certainly this is coming up in all sorts of different ways with, you know, LLMs showing up in reference contexts. And you know, I'm not necessarily an expert in this context. All sorts of questions around discoverability, metadata, cataloging, etc.
Yes.
I guess broadly speaking, I think for me, the spectrum I think I encounter, or I inhabit all different positions of that in some weird superposition at all times. But rather, I guess, just to say that I see AI pretty much everywhere we turn. And so I think sometimes, at least for me, it's helpful to be precise about what specifically we mean when we're talking about AI in these contexts and some of these newer approaches and everything. But I'll turn it over.
Hi. So, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The question that Ben brings up about, what do we mean when we say AI is, I think, a really good one. We see a lot of AI in our metadata workflows already. And there are some places where it's really functional, and there's other places where it's a little bit forced upon us, and then it makes more work for us. Like I know that there are several vendors who are sort of testing out AI tools and then relying on their community to clean up any sort of problems that are caused. And that raises a lot of questions that I would like to see maybe studied. How much time are these tools really saving us? How accurate are they? And how much human effort is required to ensure that no harm is done? So those are kind of ways that we see AI coming through. Like I think of VIAP, the OCLC's entity management tool, and they have moved further away from having human labor and more towards AI-based systems. And there's a lot of kind of cleanup needs that we've identified since that time. I think their algorithms are getting better, and they really take feedback from the community and implement it, which improves things. So we're seeing these things, and it's not necessarily within our power to choose all the time whether this is part of the products that we're looking for.
I think it's been interesting thinking about the technology that in libraries, especially academic libraries. I'm just remembering like Second Life, coming into fruition for those of you who are old enough to remember Second Life. And I think there was a lot of librarians really jumped on that bandwagon and really investigated it. And I'm finding I guess maybe a healthier critical stance from the librarians I work with. And it's somewhat of a challenge. I keep on going back and forth. I myself have a very strong, healthy criticism with it. And I feel like when we're doing instruction, information literacy, that overlap, where do we go with AI literacy? And I've seen a lot on an approach to say, well, information literacy is good enough. Let's resist this AI literacy, because there's primarily for a lot of the ethical reasons, right? A lot of the labor practices behind it, a lot of environmental concerns, great concerns. For me, I've been trying to actually working on a AI literacy for faculty course at Bothell that we should have finished up this quarter. And I feel it's really, I think the librarian approach, I think the instructional librarian approach and work information literacy is a really key approach that can really help as we're engaging and trying to understand what is a good AI literacy, and I feel we really need the librarian voice in that to participate. And I can also appreciate the resistance from my librarians to doing it. So it's an interesting place we're at.
Beautiful stretch. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful answers. I would take that class. Please send it around when it's ready. So could you folks talk a little bit more about how you're sort of projecting AI to affect your work in the future?
There's in there's the techno fantasy, right? It's just like, oh, it can do. I mean, I look at Alma Primo, I look at our cattle, it's like, oh my God, why is it so bad? Right? Can't AI just kind of come in here and help out? So there's that fantasy of, could it do things that we just still can't do, and we still are living with an inferior product for our students and faculty to search all of our resources. So that I have some hope that maybe we can leverage and participate with that, and I think I'll stop it right there.
Yeah, I think from my own perspective, I continue to be really interested and invested in like open model development. So thinking about the fact that we're very lucky at UW to have such a close relationship with, say, Allen Institute for AI and a lot of the work they're doing with OMO, which I think I would differentiate from the vast majority of corporate AI work taking place, loaded term, obviously, in the frontier labs, in the sense that they have fully open data, full model training, provenance, the weights are available, you can download them and use them. And so a lot of my work, and maybe this is a nice opportunity to mention some work in the lab and some people I've been very fortunate to collaborate with. So I think on one side of this, Catherine Fitzgerald, a PhD student in the iSchool, is doing really fantastic work just broadly around understanding AI policies in public libraries and academic libraries, understanding what values are encoded. And so I think at some policy level, I'm just interested in these questions. I think in terms of implementation, I'm also really interested in questions, instead of asking, how do we continue to scale up, which I think plays into all these questions around environmental impact, labor considerations. How do we understand sort of the maximal impact of existing models and actually begin to think about driving down compute cost and thus environmental impact for a given model or given tasks? So one example of this, it's a project called GovScape that I'm working on with a number of collaborators, including Khan in the back there, around understanding how we can, say, improve access to government documents. Where hopefully going to be, we're at about 10 million government PDFs right now, hopefully going to hit about the 100 million threshold in the coming months. And, it's pretty exciting with what we can do. We can use these fully open models and, process about 50,000 PDF pages. So fully render them, semantify them, generate image and text embeddings, search them multimodally for about 50,000 pages per dollar spent on compute. And I mention that because the environmental impact of processing 10 million PDFs, 70 million pages is the equivalent of hopping on a couple of cross-country flights. So not to say that we shouldn't be mindful of this, but it's really remarkable with the amount of compute that we have access to just with the laptops we have sitting here in this room and what we could actually leverage. And so I think I'm actually interested less in terms of the aspect of scale and scaling up, but more thinking about what we can do at a fixed point. And so actually thinking of Paul and work that we've been thinking about together, understanding ideas of minimal computing. I think how that plays in here, and not to say that AI is ever minimal in the true sense, we're not doing anything on Raspberry Pis, but to actually say that maybe the question here is to think about what is the sort of minimal AI required in order to achieve certain answers around discoverability or questions, and using that as a framework. So just wanted to mention those as some of the possibilities I see, especially given all of the very, very real questions and I think real forms of engagement and refusal that librarians are exploring now, and some paths that I think are exciting and interesting and might allow us to have some access to the space and possibility with these emerging models.
I can see AI impacting my work in a few different ways, sort of depending on how we decide to approach it. We've seen sort of ideas about AI being able to perhaps supplement a shrinking workforce. And I think that that is a little bit scary because of quality control issues. So we see, there are fewer and fewer catalogers. UW is not unique in that fact. There's just not as much money to go around. Human catalogers cost money. So for something like Alma AI, you've got fewer people who can really do quality control checks. And then you've got something that seems less expensive, easier, and that is more scalable. We don't really know the consequences of that approach yet. So it's hard to say. But I think, you know, we can't encode things like judgment and a moral compass and things like that. And that's a really, really central part of what metadata librarians do. So there's that road. And then there's another road that we can take, which requires things like AI literacy classes for librarians, where we think about how we can critically use these tools, strategically use these tools in more sustainable ways to do things like picking out horribly offensive terms in the catalog or updating information that's obviously wrong, setting up validation schema and then running them on way more data than a person reasonably could. So I think that it's really dependent on the level of education that we all take upon ourselves. Yeah.
We're making this work. All right. Thank you all. It's been really fascinating to hear about how AI has already shown up in your careers. Also, for those folks who are standing in the back, we have added some chairs. If you don't want to stand for the next hour or so, please don't be shy. So what I want to do for the rest of the panel is sort of widen out from how you've been working with AI in your careers into the broader field. And so we're going to contrast the next two questions, and we're going to start with the happier one, the more positive one. From your stance, can you talk a little bit about how, like, what positive opportunities are you seeing AI build in your field right now? Hopefully there's some.
Thank you. I mean, I think I remain excited about possibilities we have when we just contend fundamentally with questions of scale. The Internet Archive just archived its trillionth webpage, which, I mean, I don't know how we make sense of scale at that scale. All just to say that, you know, I do think we're at this sort of inflection point, and not to say that preservation has been solved or digital preservation by any means, but sort of at this point where the question is actually shifted over to access. And I just don't see any way of contending with a trillion web pages with something other than some sort of AI-based methodology, what that looks like. And so I do really think there are possibilities for access. And I also do think, as I think I alluded to before, that there are sort of a spectrum of different kinds of approaches and models that we can use that don't necessarily require us being as enmeshed. I think there's always questions of enmeshment, but as enmeshed in some of these questions around just the enormous environmental impact of this work, the labor considerations, sources of training data, I don't know, all of those considerations. So I think it's an exciting time in that way where we continue to see the more materials that are possible to be searched actually beginning to develop methodologies to contend with that. I'm sure we'll get to some of the negative questions in a moment, so I'll hold off until then. Yeah.
So I think that these tools and their strengths and weaknesses have they're giving us an opportunity to really showcase the value of our work. You know, what do you need a human for? And the answer is a lot. So it's a nice opportunity to kind of demonstrate, you know, when you don't invest in high quality metadata that's curated or at least reviewed by a person, this is the result. You know, you've got an AI model telling you to put glue in the pizza or something. So I think that those sorts of things are important. And I also think that through education on AI models and the types of AI models that cite their sources, we can actually do some pretty good critical thinking training for our patrons and say, you know, the the tool that you use to look up this resource is not a proper citation, but if you dig in and see where it got its information and cite that, then that's where you get your information from. And I think that those sorts of opportunities to help people critically think about these tools important.
I think in an interesting twist, something you mentioned that, so one of the challenges with training AI has been kind of the emotional labor that has been used to train it. But potentially we could also now use AI to do some of the emotional labor, to go through some of our problematic collections to kind of triage and maybe identify that could be helpful and save people from doing some of that work. I mean, then it's getting to the point of flagging it and you still have to step in. I'm also like to look societal wide and the changes, I mean, from the pandemic, the everything that's happened. And I know some students are intimidated by librarians, and having an AI mediator tool for being able to, potentially, well, I think already in our 24/7 chat, some people already think it's AI mediated, right? Even though it's all live as far as I know. I think though that there's even for myself, from my own experience using like Claude as an interlocutor, I'm a little bit more free in asking questions that I'm not feeling like I'm being judged so much. And I think that's a significant thing. I think that even though librarians are these lovely, wonderful, warm, caring people, and nobody should be afraid of us, there's still an intimidation factor because we are, have our hands in the information, and we have lots of education and even some opinions about things. So there might be that role that can, for those who are interested, having a more of an AI mediated engagement, because it's not an either or, it's always a both and, right? So we need to still always provide that human aspect, but I think it's potential. I mean, we're seeing it in reference. It's just always changing. So.
Folks, I've found in the field, in museums and in my museum studies classes, that when we talk about AI and applications of AI in museums in particular, that is met not entirely, but almost absolutely with skepticism from students and early career folks. So yeah, let's talk about that. What are the detriments that you're seeing to your field?
Hi. So we've already talked about, bad merges, and that's sort of the bane of a cataloger's existence. It's so hard to disentangle all the Benleys from each other once they've been mashed together, So we've got that issue, and we've also got situations where you start to catalog something and you realize that whatever tool has been used to catalog it in the past has been completely off base and has assigned maybe a subject heading that is just aggressively wrong. You then need to spend more time than you probably would have spent cataloging that resource from scratch, going in and fixing it in all the records that you can get your hands on, which are also duplicated because we're using batches and we're trying to go faster. The cleanup can actually take a really long time. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of a detriment. And my students have brought up a really interesting point that, there's this environmental impact is pretty serious. And I think that we think of it and then we put it aside in its own little box a lot of times, but the environmental impact of a person cataloging something is not that much. And we're not centering this question of environmental issues enough. And then we also have issues of copyright. You know, when I sign up to test an AI tool that says it can create perfect catalog records, I'm like, okay, let me see if you can. It can. It says take a picture of the book's cover, the book's title page, and the book's back cover, and the table of contents. So, okay, this book has a copyright statement, and I'm giving you this information, and I don't know what you're doing with it afterwards. You know, what is the, so I think that we need to consider where our information is going. What is the privacy policy in this tool? Is somebody taking something that is open share alike and making it proprietary, turning around and selling information? I don't see a lot of conversations about that.
Yeah, on the note of many Ben Lees in the world, when I started here, I very quickly realized there's an assistant basketball coach by the name of Ben Lee, because I occasionally and continue to get like basketball mixtape recruiting videos from like Serbian high school players every once in a while. So anyway, one of the joys of the issues of resolving my name. But to the actual question, I don't know. I think there are obviously all these like very concrete harms that we can point to, and I think Crystal's done a wonderful job. I think the panel's already surfaced a lot of this already. I think maybe the biggest detriment that I've seen is just this feeling of this complete loss of agency that I've seen, and I think it's just really hard to contend with. It's almost like a meta detriment, if that makes sense. And I mean, I completely understand where it's coming from, and I mean, obviously, I have as I said, my own ambivalent feelings about all of this, and unsure what it means for senses of agency within the kinds of research we do. But broadly speaking, I think that's the hardest part for me to navigate. I think both in research, also in the classroom. So I don't know. I think maybe not that there needs to be a positive here or anything, but rather just, I don't know. It remains unclear precisely what this looks like and how we move forward. But I do just think this sense of collapsing in on ourselves and not having any path forward, I think, is a dangerous tendency. And so my panels like this to be extremely helpful and opening the conversation. But again, not that there has to be sort of a call here, but I think this loss of agency, I think, is just like really, really a heavy feeling that I imagine many of us experience, and I've noticed within libraries in general. And so how we can figure out paths forward, lanes forward in the face of this, I think, is like maybe the most important question that I've encountered around all of this, so to speak.
Thank you for queuing me up for that. That was great. Because this is I just had a chapter accepted that's talking about this, that really, and for me it was really engagement with writing with AI tools and comparing me writing with a typewriter, manual typewriter versus AI tools. Those of you who know me aren't surprised that I'm typing with a manual typewriter. But it's really, it's the part of cognitive offloading that, especially as educators, what happens, where's that role? And I started by going back to Plato and going from an oral tradition to a literate tradition. We cognitively offloaded memory, right? And that gave us this ability to analyze that made it was quite different. Socrates wasn't too happy about it, so they'd give us the semblance of knowledge without the knowledge itself. I completely agree. Now we have AI writing for us, and it's given authors now the semblance of knowledge without the knowledge itself, right? This is a whole nother level. And what I'm trying to look for, trying to remain somewhat optimistic, is if some of this cognitive offloading happens, what is it going to be? What's our opportunity as humans? What is there something that we can be more creative? Can we step into this to continue to engage our cognition. So, you know, the movie Idiocracy doesn't come into reality, right? Because I really feel that if we're just taking the easy path and we're just letting AI do the work, then we're not continuing that struggle, that all knowledge creation comes through struggle. And the AI promises that you don't need to struggle anymore. You can have AI give you the words, and there's that, again, semblance of knowledge without knowledge.
You. Yeah, I really appreciate y'all's honesty. I also really appreciate that it wasn't completely for me. So thank you for giving us a little bit of the optimism within the pessimism. I mean, AI is a hard thing to think about, and it's a hard thing to work with because it changes daily, right? Sometimes faster than that. So look, earlier this week, right? I'm sure most of us read the news that at Meta, now employees are being required to record every keystroke so that AI can replace them. So let's talk about that in our field. What are the effects like that you're sensing that AI has had on careers and on the marketplace in our field? Crystal.
Hi. I think you know, there's this impression that AI can replace librarians sometimes or library specialists. And we've got these tools that are claiming that they can do our jobs. And sometimes those claims are purchased. and then we see that they can't do our jobs. They're more parrot than we are. They can't think. They can't make judgment calls. And so what we end up with is messier data for those of us who are left. And that's kind of a reality that we're seeing in the workforce, is that there's more work for sort of everybody else. Or when we were supposed to have maybe said, okay, these entities have been managed using an algorithm. Now we don't have to think about it. We can just link to them. But when you open it to link to it, it's got 12 different Ben Lees, and the basketball coach is all mixed up with our AI specialist. And it's taking more effort and more time. And I think that we have this vocational awe and this sort of helping profession where we want all the knowledge to be perfect. So like looking at yesterday, I came across an item for Ibram Kendi that had been vandalized in Wikidata. And I was like, oh, I was just trying to do some Wikidata, and now I've got this whole thing. So I end up, doing that work on my own time at home, where I'm just sort of taking a few extra steps to try to make sure that his item is protected so that nobody makes racist claims about him on Wikidata that then get perpetuated all the way downstream. So we've got sort of these sorts of mistakes happening. And then there's people who are still responsible for the quality of all of this work, who are then just like weighed down with the need to repair it for our patrons, because we want them to have accurate knowledge at the end of it. So I see that as an impact on metadata creators.
I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, please. Sure. No, Chris, I appreciate everything that you said. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's sort of maybe embedded in there the two questions of what I think will happen and what I think should happen, maybe at some level. I mean, I think obviously, maybe without saying that, it's like obviously really, really harrowing to think about the prospect of librarians, catalogers, et cetera, being replaced. I just want to emphasize, obviously, that's not a world that I want to see in any way. I have heard anecdotally, certainly, of some places and managers already beginning that process of thinking about how to automate out catalogers. I really could not disagree with such a decision more strongly for all sorts of reasons, whether it's the labor components, whether it's the quality of the work being produced, you name it. I think I agree entirely with Crystal. I think a lot about, I don't know, has anyone here read Judy Whiteman's work, Press for Time, this incredible like STS book about how every technology introduced since the Industrial Revolution has been marketed as saving us time. And then actually what it does is just we're busier than ever. It takes longer to drive by car from the West End to the East End of London than it did to go horse and carriage in 1920 or something like 1915. And anyway, all these incredible examples. And I certainly do not think that we're exempt from this. And so I agree entirely with Crystal that the end result of this is just going to be more fracturing of our time, more investment in other things. And so obviously that's embedded within these broader social constructs that we live in and all sorts of questions of power and I don't know, distribution of capital and stuff that I think is the really important thing that we attend to right now. But all just to say that I don't think, practically speaking, we're going to see our lives drastically improved and all of a sudden have a 15-hour work week. I mean, I think it's just going to make more for us to do, being very honest. So I don't know, maybe those are two maybe slightly disparate views here. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah.
And practically just being out in the library, I mean, I haven't seen much change besides just talking, right? And we're a medieval institution, right? It's like we take a while to change. I think the worry, as the worry almost always is the underlying capitalistic landscape that we exist within that puts a lot of pressures on us. My sense is we'll be dabbling. I have an open library position for natural sciences and data, and I've stuck AI on the end of that to see if I can get approval to open it up and get someone. I think having that knowledge is important, so we can speak articulately and criticize articulately, and really make sure that our voice is represented in the broader dialogue at the university level and all levels. But currently I've not seen, like a lot of changes happening right now.
Thank you. Okay. Big question, but an important question. What is some advice that you would give early career professionals, folks who are hoping to enter your field, about how to prepare for the AI revolution within your field?
I'm reminded of Just Say No campaign, right? Nancy, it's like, and it didn't really work for that. And I'm not sure if it really works for AI, though I really respect that. And I think part of talk about agency, I think faculty and students all need to have the agency to say no, right? I think when we build our courses, of course, unless we're taking a class in AI, then I'm sorry, but you actually do AI stuff. I think for being in the library, especially the academic library, I do feel that there needs to be a number of people who can, like I said before, be able to articulately criticize and bring to the forefront valid concerns from the environment, from the using the global south train data. There's some serious concerns that are absolutely need to be a part of the conversation. And I think we need to have our expertise and our training to help articulate how we might engage with AI. When is the choice worth the drawbacks, and when is it not? And so to really understand, and I mean that's kind of an individual, but it's also, I think as a university we're talking about that right now. So
I agree entirely, and I think maybe going back to the broader point of agency, I think being able to articulate this and be able to formulate reasons as to why to resist certain forms of AI encroachment from vendors and such is really important here. So yeah, just all to say that I really agree. I know among the current MIS cohort, there's a real, I think, appetite and interest in modes and forms of AI refusal, and I think that's really essential here. I also think that form of dialectic engagement of being able to sharpen one's argument as to why to resist certain forms of AI is just necessary for everyone, even if you're really excited about it, because I think we need to have those critical skills. So I think I agree entirely. I mean, I think maybe my 30,000 foot view on this maybe is less about librarians and AI literacy and maybe just like trying to convince someone at OpenAI to take a library class or something, but I don't know if I'll win that battle. But yeah, I think I agree. And broadly speaking, again, maybe ways that can tap into modes of refusal, agency, having control over how we shape the future of libraries, I think is essential here. When we're constantly being told that everything's going to happen inevitably, and no, it's nothing new to anybody, but I think it's another form of technology is just telling us it's coming no matter what. So maybe us having some agency in that is essential.
I agree with that. I think that as far as what students need to know about these tools is that, not everyone is going to be at an institution like the University of Washington, where folks in charge are keeping up with AI, and where there's tons of research going on at their own institution where they can borrow expertise. There's going to be a lot of folks who are the only librarian, or there's going to be folks who work in a very small library consortium where the person in charge has no idea what these technologies can do or what they can't do. So I think the ability to manage up and to be able to educate people at the place that you go in a way that doesn't completely shut down dialogue is really important. And that doesn't necessarily mean that students need to start becoming prolific users of ChatGPT or anything like that. But it does mean, reading articles and examining test data, looking at outputs of data that other people have already generated and saying, okay, well, what does this look like? What's the cost benefit? And trying to figure out how to take something like personal refusal, which I fully respect and I think is great, make it into something where you can influence policy in a way that is bigger than just you and your own personal usage. Can you help make your library more informed about these technologies? And I think that students who are just graduating from programs like the MLIS program are very well positioned to do that if they're able to talk about it without shutting down every single sort of opening for communication.
And maybe one thing I'll add is to say that for those who I think are interested in learning more and pursuing these directions, just maybe a quick plug for some organizations and more communities of practice that are doing great work. Excuse me, the AI for LAM organization has their annual Fantastic Futures Conference. It'll be this year in DC and in September, and they always have all of their resources put online. So that's fantastic. Broadly speaking, like works like such as collections of data, I think can be really valuable here. Work by our colleague Melanie Walsh with AI for Humanists is a fantastic project. Programming historian, Code for Lib. We're actually at a time where we're starting to see some communities really engage with these questions and have a lot of resources for diving a little bit deeper. So just wanted to offer those too in case there are those of you who might be interested in those resources.
Yeah, thank you, folks. That all resonates with a lot of what I've been thinking about, and I've had so many conversations with students. But I think kind of when I teach like anything around AI museums it's very hard to get students sometimes past this hurdle. But I think a crucial initial stage is it's not if, it's when, right? It's like we have to accept that this technology is here, and then how are we going to integrate it, right? Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's get a round of applause for our next one. We're going to go on to the Q&A portion of the panel.
So my question is, what is, I know that there is already an application of AI in different operations of library, like cataloging, and perhaps, there are inbuilt AI in the databases when you're searching them. And then we're talking about like chatbots where there's no human necessary. Just, I think, I don't know if it's already there. So I'm kind of wondering what is the process of deciding which tool is the best in this library, in a library like of this size, and whether, and if it's already implemented, how do you collect statistics on how it's working, what are the pitfalls, who decides whether it needs fixes or whether you need to shift to another AI tool, like all that. I know that we are using AI without knowing it, but how is the decision being made, and how much just curious, because I probably don't know what is happening behind the scenes, so that's my question.
I think that's your pay grade.
That's a great question. So right now, in the best I can translate what you're specifically asking is kind of that chat bot, right? And really we have the chat 24/7 that is run by humans, and it's a consortium. Best I understand it, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong because I get my hands into that. But our librarians they take shifts and oversee that. And in the off hours, 2 in the morning, other people around, I think it's the state that are participating. So, and that's the one that I think has been thought that some people didn't realize that it was actually people, like on the other, that had already been replaced with an AI bot, but that hasn't happened. I think one thing, I don't know, most people might have probably heard of Purple. One thing I've been playing in Purple is kind of creating my own small library that when I ask specific questions, it's drawing on specific resources, like 250 resources in continental philosophy, so I can kind of engage and go back and forth. So that's, and I know Purple's thinking about having something available for the university itself, but currently it also gets into copyright issues, right? So what I could imagine being a fabulous tool would run up against the ability, because of all of our agreements with all of our databases that specifically have in the past 2 or 3 years have put in clauses you cannot use this for AI scraping. So there's some really practical limits to being able to get a tool that actually could serve us really well. And whether that's, there's a lot of librarians that are engaging with AI in UW libraries and are looking into that, but it hasn't happened. That process, we'd probably need a recommendation from that group to kind of rise up through to cabinet and make that decision. I don't know if that was a good answer.
No, that's a very good answer, but and I don't want to take everyone's time, but just quickly, that besides the chatbot, are there any other areas, like you were talking about the cataloging and metadata, where there is actively this AI is being used without me or us being conscious of it, like perhaps the AI which is in the database itself or something like that. But you can just give me a quick answer because I'm sure other people might be waiting to question.
Denise just left.
So
But she would have been a really good person to ask about this. I think most of the times, the times that I know of when we're using AI and it's not necessarily clear who decided, it's the vendor decided to put it in. And I don't know, I'm not privy to the conversations between the UW libraries and vendors that we use. but I see it as sort of the vendor is playing with this technology. They decided it's part of the package and there's no really not accepting it. I think that at some point it might be valuable for us to have a conversation with other libraries about these technologies and whether we could create our own. You know, how much do this technology cost? How much do these things cost versus how much would it cost for us to have our own developers and develop shared systems like the LD4 group has done with Synovia, for instance. So I think those sorts of conversations when it comes to who's making this choice and why, I think a lot of times we think of vendors as just being these people who can do whatever they want. But you know, maybe we could build something else that we liked better, like purple.
Thank you.
Because the topic today is specific, I think it's very practical, and Crystal brought up cataloging as one of the areas where automation is coming in, and you talked about the use case of reparative classification, which to be very honest, it's an area that I'm very skeptical about, because there is this idea of like amnesty, that if we remove all the hideous languages that we have in our collection, in a way we are revising the provenance of like where our records came from and how our field has, you know, like described these records in the past. So I'm very concerned about like amnesty at scale, that like now if we kind of like erase that history from our stack, it's harder for people to kind of like recover that history so that we can make more demands for social justice. So with that framing, what do you think is like a way for us to use automation but at the same time like work towards like social justice?
That's such a good question. And I want to give credit for this idea to Benjamin Reesenberg at the University of Oregon. While they were here, we had a critical cataloging group where we examined our mostly content DM resources, electronic resources, and we were looking for a specific term that is not a good term, not going to say it, but it required us to go in and change the term to something else. It was a term for a demographic group, but it was an umbrella term for many demographic groups. And the data that we had did not do enough to distinguish one group from another. It just gave everyone this blanket horrific term. So what Benjamin did was create a field in Content DM that was hidden from discovery and that was not searchable. So people can't just type their racism into the catalog and get what they want. But we can still find it. So we can still find these terms in the back end of Content DM. And if scholars want them, they are there. And we put in a note and said, we removed this term on this date because it was racist. And this is what we replaced it with. Yeah. And I think that those sorts of practices are very important for the reasons that you stated. So I would like to see that happen with all of the workflows. Yeah. Benjamin's.
Has there been any thoughts about that? How do we keep that human element, that idea element?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question, and I think it's in the work we do. I think contextualization is important. So when we discover problematic issues, I think it's having really those very, I guess, honest questions on how do we frame this? How do we not erase it and do a revisionist history and say, oh yeah, things were fine, but how do we maybe put in protections so people don't unintentionally come up against something that can be harmful, and at the same time, so it's that both and, right? So I think that's that your response is on that. But we have things in the library that are like that, and I think we're coming up with creative ideas on bringing in if it's a certain like white Western perspective, bringing in the indigenous perspective as an overlay, and so we can have in conversation. And so I think using the technology to find things and surface them, and then we can actually, as humans, engage and figure out what is an appropriate for space and place and time. And I think that's the work we all bring to this. We bring from our hearts wanting to do this work, and we really realize how important it is.
Great panel, and I was just amazed how agency was brought up while talking about these issues, because when what Crystal mentioned about how maybe it will be more practical if we just build our own system because of all the vendors that are like monopolizing the systems that are being used in labs. So I guess my question is like, how much agency do we really have when all the tools that you're using are from the vendor? And has it really worked in the past, or do you have examples wherein the vendors pushing this feature and then like you push back as workers from labs and they listen? Does that happen often?
Seems like maybe no.
I was just gonna also, maybe this is good, making a plug for the series continuation where we're doing more of a deep dive on metadata and cataloging, right? Crystal? Yeah.
Yeah.
Crystal will be there. So you're the instigator of that. And that's May 22nd. So, and there will be a vendor represented, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
And he's very nice. So everybody who works at OCLC is just, I think we can distinguish, and Jeff can definitely distinguish, or not Jeff, Morag. I think that, we've got folks who are working at vendors, and those are people, and they have their own agency issues with their own employer, right? So we've got these wonderful people who are working at these vendors, and then we've got the vendors who are making decisions that are not necessarily value aligned with the people who work there, who can't say that, but we can. So I think that, yeah, we're gonna have our representative Morag Boyd from OCLC there, and I think that a lot of those questions are very pertinent, and she may have to be strategic in how she answers those questions. But OCLC is definitely one of those vendors that has done things sort of unilaterally when it comes to the AI that they're using. And there is no amount of hubbub that we can create that would be enough to change their minds. So I think those are really good questions. And then it becomes an issue of, well, how much does it take to coordinate resistance versus how much does it take to build a system that is slightly less crummy than the one that we're paying for? And maybe I'm just a really big fan of things like MediaWiki, where we've got a lot of tools that can be adapted that are open source that we could potentially use. I mean, it seems like an avenue that is maybe under.
And this is a part of a long-going issue in libraries. I mean, I did my MLIS in 2003 and was involved with SPART as a, joining, just starting to try to do more open publishing versus, contrary to Elsevier's of the world who are proprietary. And when libraries stopped collecting everything in print and having that full agency and ownership, and we're the curators of that, to giving it over to the vendor and started getting rid of our collections. This is a great question that goes deeply in academic libraries. And I think it's for me, agency starts with awareness, starts with education. I think the worst thing that can happen is us being nudged by or involuntarily sucked into using AI when we didn't give consent to that. What happens though when it gets so prevalent that it's in everything? I mean, there's only so much. I think that there's some things that will be AI will always be in the background, kind of background relations that we won't know about it. But then I think there's I guess for what I'm focusing on is that primarily where we step into engaging with an LLM and like Claude or ChatGPT, then that's for me as an educator, this is where I want our awareness to be, so we as users can really feel and understand what is going on with our agency and what we're giving up, and are we okay? Because there are times when, yes, I will give up a portion of my agency to have this benefit. But I think that comes from the awareness first.
Actually, Richard, this is for you. I mean, in that same vein, but you are clearly kind of have early access to Purple AI, and maybe others here do, because I don't think it's been released yet. But I mean, it's, what's your sense of it? I mean, both in terms of as a user, but also as a kind of a strategy that you do. And I don't know how much of that implicates the libraries at all, and that might exist separately from the libraries. I don't know if part of it is going to be rolled out to kind of help students kind of navigate the libraries too. But I mean, just, your assessment of Purple AI is just both experience using the tool, but as a sort of strategy for the University of Washington.
Thanks. Yeah.
And anyone else who might be an early adopter, early user here.
So full disclosure, yes, I started playing in, I think it was last August. I started playing with Purple, and I kind of built a library that I can engage with, and it was a continental philosophy chapter.
Yeah.
I think. Yes, it's like everybody. I'm surprised I was the only one. And then a couple of months later, it came to the level of UW Library's cabinet that, they have this part of one of their chatbots was something about library search or something. It was like, what? Shouldn't we be a part of that conversation? And so we actually got involved and we had a conversation with the people who are organizing the Purple rollout. And I haven't had much I haven't played that much since then. So that's 8 months ago. So, it was at that time for some things I liked it. For the kind of the most recent versions of like Claude that were coming out were always like the next iterative step ahead, and I could do a lot just within that and get the responses I wanted. And so I haven't continued, I haven't gone back, but I think I should.
No. I have the same question.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine because they're constantly adding, like when I first started, it was ChatGPT something, and it quickly moved to the next level. So
it's different models too, right? It's not just one. It's not a contract with just one of the big AI.
When I first started, it was only ChatGPT, but the Claude was grayed out. But I think that's now option. So yes, so again, I feel I shouldn't be talking about it because it was 8 months ago.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's changed greatly since then. but I can see like that would be something if we can figure out how to get ownership and moderate our content within a closed system, so we could potentially address some of the copyright issues, that we could actually build our own kind of a mid-size language model that's specific to the UW and our research. That's very intriguing. But then it's always these boundary areas, and it's problematic.
Other questions? We had a previous here.
We had a question submitted previously, and it was from a student. It's a very complex question, so I'm going to do my best to summarize it, and hopefully I'll do it justice. So I think it's very common and it's very easy to carve a binary between Lamb's work and the AI field, right? And the sort of tech focused, like frontier labs, and like, and I think the question essentially was asking, and I know you folks already touched on it, but I do want to make sure we get to it. Like, why are we, as folks who work in the Lamb's field, why are we buying to this? Like, why are we even attempting to make these bridges with these new technologies when it can very, very often, and it feels like these are just diametrically opposed value systems, right? Like, yeah. That's a big question. I know. I hope I did a good job. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question. I say this as someone up here does not have an MLS, so take this at face value. But I mean, to a certain extent, I think public librarians in general have a responsibility to the patron. If the patron has an interest in AI, shouldn't we be able to address questions related to AI just as we would address questions about all other facets of life? I mean, I guess I also think like maybe that question about this sort of distinction between Lambs and separating out the work and sort of frontier AI labs and everything, and that there is this sort of false distinction, I think is actually like a really interesting lens into all of this, because there really isn't as clear of a boundary as one might expect, right? And to a certain extent, all of AI research is predicated upon training on cultural heritage data. So this is ultimately a land problem, so to speak. I think in so many ways, the like fundamental underpinnings of the interest in a lot of these technologies have been grounded in library questions. We go back to like a lot of the early CS research in the 90s around the World Wide Web and everything. It's all informed by libraries. And so I actually think it's a lost opportunity to not be interfacing with these conversations from a land perspective on all of it, because in certain ways, I think in not doing so, it risks letting other actors in this space sort of speak on behalf of libraries, or sort of take control of conversations that I think actually emerged out of libraries. It was actually very unidirectional in certain ways, even though it seems as though it's the other direction oftentimes. But yeah, I mean, maybe just to the core of the question, I guess I wonder about the role of librarians, and maybe be not necessarily be fluent in these things, but recognizing that, I don't know, it seems as though everyone has an interest in learning more. And so maybe libraries are actually not just a place to do this, but an important place in terms of grounding conversations around information literacy historically, and sort of think AI literacy is a part of that umbrella. I don't mean to sort of conflate two things here, but also seems like a lost opportunity not to bring those conversations around AI into a place where we have like the last plus trusted public institution in this country to be having these conversations, not to say we should sort of dilute our information and make it all LLM garble, but I think there's real value here.
Yeah, actually, so I started my PhD looking at how does technology mediate museum visitor experiences, and it was, so I feel like that the technology, I think in museums, it's connecting with visitors, right? It's telling the narratives how, and so I think there is room to explore how might AI allow us to enhance that, or do it in such a way for certain select groups of museum visitors. I mean, we're seeing such a multiplicity of different types of museum engagements. I'm thinking like the virtual ones, the big Van Gogh museums with that you can interactive and be inside the painting type of thing. That's like it's always goes back to the and right. It's and what can be the role of a certain museum, and that's really I'd say it's with technology, it's another potential, and how do we explore that? And I think going to your point is it's really important that museums are having that discussion and really leading that understanding and really raising some of the challenges and dangers and what potentially could actually connect with more visitors.
I agree with all of that. And I also think that there's we sometimes take these economic considerations and let them overshadow the fact that AI and libraries a lot of times are both sort of in the business of information provision. And I think that LLMs, for instance, have a lot to learn from libraries when it comes to the information provision portion. And there's a lot of sort of reactivity to the commodification of knowledge that kind of grosses us out as librarians. But then we also can potentially think about, there's only so many of us. We don't have any money generally. And so being able to be in conversation with these tools and try to figure out how to harness them for ourselves, how to help our users use them responsibly, can be a separate conversation from like the owners of these companies polluting the planet, trying to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Other thoughts, other questions from the audience?
One more thing that I'll add, and maybe putting on my, I don't know, AI hat, so to speak. I think it's really interesting, and I would suggest all of you was engage with the new vice provost of AI, Noah Smith, who's been an NLP researcher for decades and is leading the development of OMO, the open language models, AI too. Doing really fascinating work, and he talks about this really, really articulately. But I do think to a certain extent, it's just a real bummer in terms of what's happened with the explosion of AI, because I do think like it's important that we have academic researchers pursuing these directions, and like to a certain extent it all has been poisoned in ways that I think detracts from some of the possibility with this kind of research. It's not clear to me that AI research had to be predicated upon massive layers of extraction and environmental pollution. And I actually think that one of the really dangerous parts of this from my perspective on the AI side has been the collapse of academic AI research because of these frontier AI labs poaching everyone, investing so much capital, emphasizing research approaches that are no longer around training small models, thinking about different types of approaches. And, fundamentally, I mean, I feel like this is a persistent question about whether these things that conscious, I don't know, I don't mean to go in that landscape, but just to say that like, clearly those models don't behave like humans do. We don't require 800 trillion examples to understand what an orange is or to pick up a mic when we drop it. And so like, clearly there are all sorts of interesting directions of AI research that have been foreclosed as a result of this one kind of direction of research. And so I think not only has it sort of restricted the possibility of what we can think of when it means for information or say the commodification of knowledge, but also it's foreclosed on all sorts of possibilities of what the technology itself could have been or the research directions that we could pursue. And so, I mean, I even see all sorts of really interesting questions around agency these days of doing the actual AI research itself. So,
Yeah. Crystal, Richard, any final thought? Yeah. Thank you everyone for being here. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, then I was just going to say that, as I mentioned before, this is the first of 3 in the series, and you can see this with the careers, but it's certainly, they've already touched on the cataloging and climate in their remarks. And so we'll have deeper dives in both of those topics in the next 2. That's May 15th and May 22nd. May 22nd, you'll see Crystal again there. So please kind of consider that this is sort of a conversation that's going to continue over the next month. I also wanted to thank UW Libraries and Textual Studies in the form of Jeff and Julie for being the co-organizers with COMA on this event. Really appreciate the collaborative spirit that we have today. Thank you.
Let's get more final thoughts.